Greetings and welcome back to Another Perspective. Today I am very fortunate to be joined by a gentleman who has volunteered his time from his very busy schedule from Ghana in Western Africa. And I didn't think I'd ever get the opportunity to interview or talk to somebody from Ghana, but here we have it. A gentleman joining me is currently studying in the United States. He is a student of Geotechnical Engineering, which is a pretty rare subfield of engineering. And I just want to thank you for joining me first.
Well, thanks for having me, Stardust.
No, it's my pleasure, and thank you for joining me. So I was asking you privately, but one thing that I've read, and I can't confirm this since I've never been to Ghana, but it seems that compared to a lot of the surrounding countries, Ghana is well known for being much more stable, safer, and having fewer conflicts than some of the other places. And I think this is, in your observation experience, well, this has been your experience as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And it's not because and this is a strange thing, it's not because there isn't a lot of, say, ethnic or religious diversity in Ghana. I mean, there is, right?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
It's not like everybody is the same there. And yet, for some reason, my favorite example is Nigeria, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. The Muslims aren't killing the Christians, and the Christians aren't killing the Muslims, and in Nigeria, the Igbo hate the Hausa, but all these different tribes that live there, ethnic groups, they all kind of get along. So, for example, the Akans, which are the majority, I think, get along with the Dagbani.
Yes.
Okay. Well, is there anything that you know of in the history of Ghana that that you could say is kind of a precedent or maybe a building block for that, something that you're aware of in your country's history that makes it stand out in that regard? Anything?
I'm not really sure about that. All I know is we are just inherently peaceful. That is what I think. But I cannot say what it is exactly that makes us that way. I cannot comment on that. Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, the majority of the country is Christian. There's a pretty big Muslim population as well, but none of the conflict that you find, say, in Nigeria with Boko Haram, that doesn't spill into Ghana at all, right?
No, we don't experience that.
Okay. Yeah. And you were talking earlier about Ghana, though, that it is a very traditional place and very hierarchical. So what is, when you're growing up in Ghana, what is the expectation, particularly as a male, of what you're supposed to do with your life?
I think the first thing is the education. I think these days everybody is expected to have a very good, solid education. So as a male, you are expected to go to school, and definitely after school you get a job, and then you enter marriage. So that is actually the expectation of most males in Ghana.
Right. And what is the typical marriage age there, would you say?
I think between mid-20s to 30s.
Okay. So you get an education, I guess I'm presuming you also mean university education, and then you get married, and then you have many children.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so to speak, yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that you kind of feel outside of that paradigm, and that you don't really feel that's necessarily the right thing for you. So maybe you can talk a little bit of why you feel that way and what differentiates you from a lot of the people from your country in that regard.
Well, I think, as you move through school, sometimes you discover different things, you discover different paths, different interests, and you tend to think about things that you want to do, and maybe some of these things may not fall in line with what society demands from you. And so I think that discovering yourself is very important, and that is what I think. That is what I think. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, okay, it partially does, but when you say self-discovery, what aspects of self-discovery do you feel that are not present in Ghanaian society or culture, and that maybe conflict with your own personal vision of how you should be living your life?
When I say self-discovery, I mean, you seeing what actually interests you. And for instance, if you want to work and get a lot of experience, let's say you're an engineer, depending on what you want to do. For instance, you want to open your own consulting firm or something like that. So definitely this takes diligence and a lot of hard work, and so if you are demanded, or the environment expects you to, let's say, get married at a certain age, and you feel you are not ready for that because you want to focus on your goals, then that may be a problem to some people. Others would be okay, some family would be okay with it. However, others would have a problem with that. It will be like, no, this is the time for you to settle, and that is what you are supposed to do.
Do you feel that this particular attitude you have is at least in part inspired by having lived and studied in the United States? Or was this something you've always felt growing up in Ghana?
I would say partially. In the States, but increasingly a lot of men in Ghana, I think, are focusing more on whatever goals they have, but definitely I cannot say that living here hasn't influenced me in some parts.
What if you think about it, what specifically about living in the United States has influenced you, do you believe?
Well, I think in my experience, US is more of about the individual, and basically nobody really cares about what you do as long as you don't break the laws. You are not expecting. Nobody is expecting you to do anything. I mean, nobody is really expecting you to take care of, let's say, your family. Well, unless you are married, right? But, maybe your parents don't really expect you to take care of them, or your brother, or, So it's more like you have total control and total freedom to, follow what you want to do, and just go ahead and do what you feel is right for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think... Yeah, that definitely is a very common theme in the United States. Of course, a lot of people don't think that's a good thing necessarily. A lot of people lament the loss of a kind of more traditional vision of the United States. But, well, from what I hear, I haven't lived there in a long time. It's that is pretty much what you get when you go there. And I suppose that's had some influence on you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so having lived there, and when you travel back to Ghana, that's probably one of the biggest differences, right? Because people in Ghana still have many expectations, sort of traditional ones.
Yes. It's always part of the culture. So you are always expected to do something. But I think increasingly a lot of people are becoming, more and more progressive and more liberal. in terms of their cultural predilections. So yeah, so people are now, just deciding to do things that they are interested in, and the social pressures are not really that much.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, I mean, Ghana is, from what I understand, one of the, if not the most stable country in Africa. And I think for African standards, there's a pretty big tech industry there as well, from what I understand. I'm wondering just how much of this is just, I've said this many, many times in videos in the past, the general effect of modernization. For example, what is sort of feminism's place in Ghana and women's view of that?
Well, I think in Ghana, feminism is not really overt like what you see in the Western countries.
Right.
But definitely we are assimilating a lot of the cultures from the West. So yeah, we don't have that overt feminism, and all that, but it's still there in a subtle way.
But do you think it's just a matter of time until this changes? Because everywhere you look in the world, everything seems like a ticking time bomb. So basically, given a year or 10 years or 20 years, the world all seems to just resemble one giant global monoculture, especially in terms of things like feminism and divorce and all the related subjects. So I'm just wondering if that too will be the fate of Ghana, and if you'll see a very similar society to the United States and other places.
I think so. I think in a couple of years to come, it will be that way. I mean, if you look at the city like Accra has changed so much over the years. Now with the prevalence of malls, and estate housing and other recreational centers, it's people are now living sort of like the Western lives, It's just going to continue for a long time to come, because a lot of people like that kind of life, and yeah, I think that it will just be one big monoculture.
Yeah. I think this is just where the world is heading.
Yeah.
In general, because everywhere where things are reasonably quiet and you have the technology and the comfort, things tend to drift in that direction, and Africa in this regard doesn't seem to be immune to that.
Yeah.
Now, you said it's changed a lot, Accra, the capital. When you were growing up, when you were a boy, you remember things being different then?
Yes. I would say yes. I would say there has been some differences. As like what I said with the malls and the recreational facilities, and it used not to be that way. But now you see a lot of that. Television has also changed. Over the years, a lot of females are fascinated with a lot of these telenovelas, especially the ones from the Latin American, South American ones. But prior to that, there has always been the Western ones, like The Bold and Beautiful, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So but things are changing, things are evolving, and it's becoming that way, and it's just going to continue to be that way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, the telenovelas. I mean, I don't know if you know him, Barbarossa, a guy who needs to produce content. He did a video years ago on this and how show that women's perception of marriage and divorce was heavily influenced by merely watching these telenovelas, I think for Brazil in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this seems to be a universal thing. I mean, women like soap operas. It is, for some reason, something that really interests them. People would say because they're more social and they like to observe people. I guess that's one interpretation. But of course, most of these soap operas, telenovelas, however you want to term them, whatever you want to call them, they tend to be pretty shallow. I don't really think there's a lot to be learned or gained from watching them. So
Yeah, well, that's true.
And you mentioned that earlier that you had your kind of own red pill journey.
Yeah.
Which did it occur? Did it actually start when you were in Ghana, or did you become aware of some of this stuff with women, in particular, when you're in the United States?
I would say I had inklings of that in Ghana, but there isn't so much opportunities to explore the reasons, but I think coming to the United States gave me the opportunity to actually learn about a lot of things outside my academic work. And so that gave me a chance to delve more into biology and psychology. I delved more into those areas, and looking at your channels as well also helped me to understand a lot more of this, because I think that ultimately you still need to go to the foundations or the roots of why we behave the way we behave, and so I would say I had the chance to do that here than if I were back home. But I always had inklings of things like that, just that it was unexplored.
Yeah. Well, if Ghanaian society remains fairly traditional, then I imagine it would be reasonably difficult to really explore sort of red pill topics fully if you're there.
Yeah.
And if you just sort of track your progress,
Okay.
from I mean, how did you even first start thinking about things revolving around the red pill? And was it a situation with a woman or something else? I mean, can you go into some detail on that?
Well, actually, yes, a situation with a woman, but prior to that, you also notice behaviors, of females, whether they are your family or not. You start to really question a lot of things, and definitely, once you have a close relationship with a female, then that actually, blows the lid off, to really explore more. So I would say it's a combination of both. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to analyze the behavior of your own female relatives, because obviously people feel attached to their female relatives. I mean, they're relatives, right? And so it's difficult to step out of that box and remove yourself from that to try to look at things objectively. And it's strange. I've met, or at least I've talked to men throughout the years who, not all of them, but a few who just cannot sort of apply the lens of objectivity or really scrutinize their own female relatives, whether mothers or sisters. They're somehow different or special, but right, the rest of the women, they're a certain way, and it's really bizarre to me. Because if I look back on my own mother's behavior, it's pretty obvious that she was behaving in a certain way towards my father, and it wasn't a great way, and all these things. So it's a bit strange. But obviously it seems to have been a specific encounter with a woman who, I think from what you told me, didn't like the fact that you were very involved in your studies. Is that correct?
Yes, and possibly due to the way I thought about things, because I'm quite objective about a lot of things. I try to put aside my emotions in making most decisions. So I mean, as usual, I'm human, so sometimes I always catch myself being subjective about certain things, but I try my best to be objective, and being objective about things is sort of antithetical to the way women want you to do things, So yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's strange that I guess you had a relationship with this girl that she would be so critical of your involvement in your studies, because you would think that she would think, well, if you're studying hard and frequently, then that would help you get a good job and all the kinds of things that women want in a husband. But odd that but at the same time they feel conflicted because they want to have the attention. So it's one of those great female paradoxes. A lot of these situations where the husband is working many hours, working overtime, bringing home the bacon, making the money, and the woman is at home complaining, bored, whatever, because the husband isn't there to pay attention to her, and then she ends up having an affair. I've seen some of these stories, or some nonsense like that. It's very difficult to win with women in that regard.
Yeah.
And how has this influenced your own thoughts on the prospects of marriage and all these things?
Well, with marriage, I mean, I'm still young, so I would say it's less likely for me. Less likely. I'm not absolute in terms of whether I will do it or not, but at this point in time, it's less likely because you always hear people when you have discussions with them. I've had discussions with a few friends of mine, and some will tell you, oh, not all of them are like that. You get someone who would be like this and like that, but then you try to explain that, okay, it's all about hypergamy, and it's inherent in every female, and these are things you have to deal with, and so I tell them that, well, even if you want to engage in that, I think it's just best to arm yourself with a lot of this red pill knowledge, and that way you know what you are going in for. But for me personally, I would say it's less likely, but that is what I can say at this point in time.
Well, yeah, and I think there's an important lesson, as always, to be taken from this, especially given the context, because women are basically women. I think even after many years of doing this and talking about this topic and related topics, there seems to be a persistent delusion about women. Go to this country and they're different. But everywhere you look across the globe, women are the same pretty much. They're almost entirely uniform. And sure, you go to certain countries, there'll be some slight differences because maybe the culture or the history, or maybe it's just more traditional or primitive, that they'll see those differences. But it just seems that everywhere you look across the globe, all the trends and tendencies that you see in the West are being effectively replicated as if it were a scientific experiment in countries that aren't Western or European. And I don't know really how to disabuse people of this belief, because I've tried throughout the years, but I think there are just a lot of men out there that are they're just desperate in some sense, and so they'll believe anything.
Yeah.
And rather than just accept reality for what it is.
What it is.
Yeah.
I think that just like what I was saying earlier, I was surprised about the statistics recorded in some of these countries like South Korea and Japan, and where you will think that it's more of a traditional society, but then you look at the divorce rates and it's staggering, and it's surprising, So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's only surprising if you don't understand the bigger context, right? So, I mean, it's surprising. You think, oh, wow, all these cultures. But I think one lesson that I've tried to drive home throughout the years is that biology transcends culture.
Yes.
And the basic biological variables involved in female reproductive behavior and how they interact with men, they're pretty much the same across cultures. Like I said, you will see variation, but that variation is due to environmental constraints. So, as an example, if you were to visit some primitive village someplace, then of course the women will behave somewhat differently, and there'll be different, you say, policies in place. But every country that accumulates a reasonable amount of wealth and has achieved a decent level of comfort, well, it just inevitably seems to fall into this trap, or just sort of evolves into this situation that we have today in every industrialized country in the world: China, Japan, South Korea. And I think in time, if Ghana continues on the path of prosperity, then yeah, you'll see the same thing there too. You'll probably, I think tradition can hold out for a while, but modernity eventually takes over. So
yes, I agree with that.
And then it comes down to a question of whether or not a person is willing to deal with the bullshit. I mean, if a person really, man, for example, really wants a family and all this other stuff, well, okay, but you have to accept the variables in place, and some of those variables are not going to be that pleasant.
Yeah.
And then you ask the question: is it worth it? Right? But that's the big question.
Yeah, I think that in order to have such to have, let's say, marriage or anything, and you would have to suspend the belief in reality in order to do that. But again, you can never run away from reality as well. So
I wonder, though. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, in fact, I think it'd be actually counterproductive if you suspended your belief in reality and got married. I think you're in a terrible position. In fact, it's much better, I think, to be aware of reality, and if you want to get married, and then get married, because at least you know the situation you're getting involved in. You're not thinking, well, the person this is going to be fine, and this is going to be really nice, or it's going to be some fairy tale.
Yeah.
I think it's actually, if you think about it, the people who end up in these marriages, particularly men, and even women. Women have their own fairy tales about marriage as well. It's not they're not the same types of fairy tales men have, but they are fairy tales that tend not to live up to reality.
Mm-hmm.
But people who enter marriage and think it's really anything other than a kind of reproductive contract, a business arrangement, and actually think it's about love and feelings and all this other crap, they're going to be in for a rude awakening precisely because they suspended their belief in reality. And so, yeah, I mean, the people I know who have the most successful marriages are people that look at the marriages in a very pragmatic fashion, and they don't talk about things like love and blah-de-blah. It's all about, we're together to reproduce and have children, and person X contributes the following, and person Y contributes the... But I think that the issue people have is that historically that had been the case, the sort of division of labor and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But in modern society in general, relationships have been romanticized, and part of that is propaganda. I mean, you see it in the media all the time, whether it's buying her Valentine's Day rings or the kind of crap that's pumped out by Hollywood, where it's just it affects people. People develop all kinds of delusional beliefs about human male-female relationships that just aren't really part of the equation. Things that are just farcical in some cases and pure mythology, but if you see this enough in a Hollywood film, or you read it enough in a book, particularly women do this, you're going to believe that. And of course, women are spice and sugar and spice and all things nice. This is the kind of doctrine that men grew up with, and it's interesting because before I talked to you, I was doing a bit of research on Ghana, and the first things that came up was this obsession with gender equality in the school, female to male gender representation in Ghanaian education. I just thought, okay, why is that particularly important?
It's creeping up.
yeah. So it's everywhere you look. It's occurring. I wouldn't be shocked if in 10 years, if Ghana continues on the path of prosperity, that it won't be all that different from the United States in this regard. You'll still have some of the traditions, but because there's no culture I've seen that's immune to it.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, in just some years to come, things will just be westernized a lot. I mean, we'll still hold some traditional values, but I would say they would be vague. They wouldn't be as grounded as they used to be, and so that's what I think in some years to come.
How do you feel about that personally? I mean, if Ghanaian culture were to be eroded to the point where it's almost indistinguishable from most cultures in the West, or a place like Canada or the United States, do you feel sort of a personal attachment that would feel a sort of sense of loss, or are you more interested in soil technology in your own scientific field of study? And I mean, because you seem to be very focused on your studies more than anything else. So what do you feel about that? The prospects of Ghanaian culture being basically just becoming a tropical version of the United States?
Well, I mean, I always have some connection to my home, and so definitely to see some significant loss in the culture would be, it would be a little bit troubling. I think that is what I think. It will be a little bit troubling. However, I mean, sometimes you only look forward to the good parts. I mean, in terms of scientific discoveries and so on. So that is why I look forward to that we'll be able to do things like that to a larger scale. But But then if, I know it will take a hit on our cultural heritage, and that may be a little bit troubling to me.
Yeah, but I think, and this is something that people don't understand, is that the way these things work, it's always a trade-off. So you receive A, but you might need to give away B to fully embrace A. And I imagine that some people will be willing to do that, and others not so much.
Yeah.
So, it's basically you got to go with the flow or you don't. And if you don't go with the flow, you're going to miss out on certain opportunities. And I think this is the problem that a lot of people have wherever they come from when it comes to modernity. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want all the good things, the comfort, the food, the convenience, all these things that come from the modern world. And then they want traditional marriage and nice, kind women that never swear or whatever. But it's just a fairy tale. And in order to get that kind of thing, you need to regress. You need to lose the technological advantage and all these things. That's just the nature of human reality. And I think people who don't accept that it's all a trade-off they're just living in delusion. And you just need to make a decision about these things. And, I guess if you really wanted to, you could. Actually, I keep on mentioning this guy. I knew a guy a couple of years ago who moved to a village in the Philippines to marry a traditional Filipino woman. Well, okay. It seems to have worked out. It doesn't have a lot of contact with the outside world. That's an option, I guess, if that's what you want. But if you want something more or something different, something modern, then that probably won't be an option for you.
Yeah. I mean, you always have options available. So, but as you said, there are only trade-offs. You can't eat your cake and have it. So, yes. I think ultimately it will boil down to what the individual wants. I think.
Yeah, and that's a very American attitude, I think. A lot of people probably wouldn't like that very much, but yeah, the reality is that. That's an American attitude, a sort of hyper-individualism that a lot of people don't like. But increasingly, this seems to be the case, not just in the United States. It's even creeping into very collectivist cultures in the Far East, places like Japan and China and South Korea and Taiwan. And like I said, I think we're all just on a path towards a kind of global monoculture, and people are pretty upset about that. I think there are a lot of negatives that come with that, a lot, but I don't really see any option apart from embracing that, because that's all. Well, the only possibility to not embrace that would be to sort of destroy what progress we have made in other fronts in different areas.
Yeah.
So, I think maybe it'd be interesting if you tell us a little about geotechnical engineering as a subfield of engineering, and what that involves, and what the possibilities of what geotechnical engineering might allow for human beings to do in the future.
Okay, so geotechnical engineering is, I would say, a relatively young field in civil engineering. So basically, it's the science involved in studying of soils and rocks for foundation purposes. So, putting up a structure on the ground, a road, mining, oil and gas fields, all require geotechnical engineering. And I would say it became more of um, a scientific field, after the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Rome, and that was when engineers and scientists decided to take a scientific approach to studying soils. I mean, initially people didn't see soils as things to study scientifically.
Can I just ask a question? It's interesting. So when we look at the engineering process involved in, say, constructing a building,
Yeah,
they would look at the structure of the building itself and really focus on it, and they would ignore, I guess, what you might call the foundation, which would be the soil
exactly.
underneath the building.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's typically what people do or used to do, and that is really dangerous. I mean, especially if you encounter soils that are not strong. For instance, you encounter clay, certain forms of clay, or of course, organic soils they're really good for agriculture, but not good for engineering purposes. So it's really really important to know the type of soil you're going to put your structure on, and that way you can better design your foundation for buildings or for roads.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, how long has this actually been called geotechnical engineering? Or for, I guess, it's obviously been around for some time because people must have noticed how important it is to pay attention to the soil foundation upon which buildings are placed. But it's not. I can't imagine this being because I've never actually heard the term until I talked to you. I don't think I had of geotechnical engineering. So it is a relatively, you said, young field.
Yeah.
But there also must be a lot of job opportunities involved because it is a sort of up and coming field of study and discipline.
Yes. Yeah, because looking at the world today, now increasingly people are realizing the importance of studying soils, especially for foundations. I mean, if you go to China, and typically the Asian areas with the monsoon wind, the monsoon rainfall, and those type of weather, you encounter a lot of landslides, mudslides, and so on. And just recently in Sierra Leone, I think they encountered the same problem. So, increasingly it's becoming relevant as an engineering area.
And I have a question regarding this. I mean, soil consistency is, well, it's not consistent. You just mentioned weather conditions, climatic change. How does one, I mean, I guess, how does one integrate into the process of planning an engineering project, taking into consideration the possibility of shifting variables in the soil due to climate or weather? Because you can't, I mean, once the building is up, it's up. But
Yeah.
the soil conditions beneath the building obviously could change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is I think some of the challenges we face in this field, and so increasingly a lot of research is being done to know the variables. Again, even the soil itself is variable, in nature, and so adding all these other factors make it more complex. And so the key is, performing a lot of scientific researches and exploring the use of numerical methods, where you can be able to make approximations and then know exactly what to do. But say, construction is going on, and you encounter very terrible soils and you need to put foundations on them, then there are other construction techniques that are used to strengthen the soil, at least maybe to control, when you have rainfall or other variables like that, climate, rainfall, temperature. So there are methods like that, like using what they call a geotextile. That's sort of putting some kind of materials into the soil to reinforce the soil, make it stronger. But I think that's still a challenge in geotechnical engineering, and it's still evolving, and I think a lot of people are conducting researches into.
Would geotechnical engineering, in terms of the market availability of jobs, be probably better suited to sort of tropical and subtropical areas, precisely because soil might be more variable there?
Well, the thing about soils in the tropics, in some tropics, for instance, when you look at the west coast of West Africa, or the coast of West Africa, it's usually underlain by a lot of sandstone, and sandstone is pretty, is pretty stable, but you go to certain areas that have more organic soils, due to plant remains and so on, then that becomes an issue. So with the variability of soils in tropics, it's not all soils are variable in all tropic areas. You find some are pretty stable and others that are not stable. So that is why it is very important to conduct what you call geotechnical investigations, and that will give you an idea of what type of soil you are dealing with, and through laboratory testing, you do the field investigation, you take some samples, you send them to the lab, and then you find out what type of soil you are dealing with, and then that way you are able to have an informed knowledge of what to do with it.
And where do you think you'd like, if you could work anywhere after you finish your master's degree, what areas what parts of the world are you looking to work in?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm not very sure of exactly where I would want to work. I'm always looking for challenges. That could be back home or within Africa. Exploring mines and oil and gas. Here as well, in the US, there are a lot of opportunities as well, and I think even in the Asia, I think all over the world, there are a lot of opportunities. So I'm just looking forward to the challenge, and I cannot certainly say exactly where I want to be, but will depend on where the opportunity comes from and the challenge that I'll get.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly sounds like you're a very driven guy and very interested in the subject of study you've chosen to pursue. Yeah. Well, I'm going to thank my guest for joining me today. I think it's been informative, and I think we all learned something today. If nothing else about geotechnical engineering, something I think most of us didn't know a whole lot about. And one of the lessons to be taken home is everywhere you go in the world, women are the same. In Ghana, too. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, and I will check you out at a later date. Bye-bye. Well, thank you for joining me in the conversation. I appreciate your time. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.